Dr. Elena Reyes rubbed her burning eyes as the digital clock on her lab wall blinked 3:17 a.m. The university's underfunded xenobiology department meant night shifts were common, but tonight's solitude felt different. Her colleagues had long since dismissed her theories as pseudoscience disguised as academic research. 26 grant rejections later, only her stubbornness kept her hunched over the meteorite fragment that had crashed in the Atacama Desert 6 weeks ago. Through her microscope, Elena observed the microscopic structures she'd been documenting for days. They resembled no bacteria or microorganism in any Earth database. The formation shifted slightly under the lens, not unusual for samples under heat from microscope lights. Yet something about their movement nagged at her trained instinct. The patterns weren't random. They moved with subtle purpose, reorganizing rather than simply expanding or contracting. "You're seeing patterns because you want to," she muttered to herself, repeating the criticism her department head had leveled at her methodology last semester. Elena adjusted the focus, her hand trembling slightly from too much caffeine and too little sleep. A sharp pain stung her finger, a paper cut from the notes she'd been scribbling. A tiny drop of blood welled up, and before she could reach for a tissue, it fell directly onto the edge of the sample slide. Damn it! She moved to clean the contamination, then froze. Under the microscope, the structures surged toward her blood droplet with unmistakable intention. The alien particles accelerated, abandoning their previous formations and streaming toward the human cells. Elena's heart hammered as she fumbled for her phone to record what was happening. This wasn't cross-contamination. This was response. The microstructures reached her blood and began reorganizing themselves into new patterns, not random shapes, but a perfect double helix. They were mimicking human DNA. "That's impossible," she whispered, knowing immediately that nothing in her scientific training could explain what she was witnessing. These weren't just extraterrestrial microorganisms. They were actively responding to human biology with what appeared to be recognition. With shaking hands, Elena prepared another slide. This time, deliberately adding a tiny drop of her blood to a fresh sample. The reaction repeated, faster this time. The alien structures rearranged into complex patterns that mirrored not just DNA structure, but began forming additional shapes that resembled neural networks. Dawn light crept through the laboratory blinds as Elena documented everything, triple-checking each observation. Her phone filled with video evidence as she ran preliminary tests that confirmed the obvious. The structures contained no Earth-based genetic material, yet responded specifically to human cells in ways that suggested not just recognition but communication. When her department head arrived at 8 a.m., he found Elena still at her station, surrounded by slides, printouts, and simulation models. "I found something," she said simply, her voice steadied despite not having slept. "And it knows what we are." Within 24 hours, Elena's discovery had reached beyond her university to government research facilities. Within 48, international science organizations were requesting samples. By the end of the week, the linguists and communication specialists had arrived, all asking the same question. If these alien microstructures were attempting communication with humans, what were they trying to say? Elena knew one thing with absolute certainty as she watched her formerly empty lab fill with experts from around the world. Humanity was not alone in the universe, and perhaps we never had been. 3 weeks after Elena's discovery, her modest university lab had transformed into a high-security research facility. Government scientists operated quantum computers and advanced imaging equipment that cost more than the entire xenobiology department's annual budget. Elena watched from the corner as they attempted to communicate with the alien structures using every conceivable stimulus: light patterns, electrical impulses, radiation, magnetic fields, and chemical compounds. Nothing worked. The structures responded only to human biological material, and even then, their reactions seemed inconsistent and impossible to decode. Jason Park, Elena's graduate student, sat beside her analyzing data streams. Unlike the other researchers with their prestigious degrees, Jason had come to xenobiology through an unconventional path. His undergraduate work in music theory had led to studies in pattern recognition that eventually brought him to Elena's lab. "They're treating it like a code to crack," Jason muttered, watching a physicist adjust a laser array. "But what if it's more like a conversation?" On the 5th consecutive day of failed experiments, Jason arrived early to the lab. Elena found him sitting alone in the observation room, playing his violin. She started to interrupt. Instruments weren't allowed near the samples, but stopped when she noticed the monitor displaying the alien structures. They were moving. Not random shifts, but precise, rhythmic reorganizations that followed the cadence of Jason's melody. "How long has this been happening?" Elena whispered, not wanting to break his concentration. Jason kept playing, a backed partita that filled the silent lab with cascading notes. "Since I started. Watch what happens when I change to something different." His bow shifted into an improvisational jazz piece, notes tumbling over each other without clear pattern. On the screen, the alien structures responded immediately, abandoning their ordered formations for beautiful spiraling configurations that expanded and contracted with the music's intensity. "They're not just detecting sound," Elena realized. The classical piece created mathematical patterns, but they're responding to the emotional intent, Jason finished. The unpredictability. The human element. Within hours, Elena and Jason had assembled a small team to test their theory. They exposed samples to recorded music spanning cultures and centuries, from Mongolian throat singing to electronic dance music. The responses varied dramatically but consistently. Mathematical formations emerged from structured compositions, while chaotic yet beautiful patterns formed when exposed to improvisational pieces. The breakthrough came when comparing human-created music to computer-generated compositions, mathematically designed to mimic emotional patterns. The aliens responded dramatically to the human creations, but barely reacted to the algorithmically perfect computer music. "They're not responding to the sound," Elena explained to the assembled scientists that evening. "They're responding to the creative consciousness behind it, the emotional intent, the distinctly human quality of our expression." The government team's skepticism dissolved when their most sophisticated communication algorithms failed, while a children's choir singing simple folk songs produced immediate, complex reactions from the alien patterns. As news spread among the scientific community, musicians, artists, and performers began arriving at the facility. The aliens responded uniquely to each human creative expression, forming communication patterns that defied conventional scientific analysis, but resonated on an intuitive level with human observers. "We've been thinking about communication all wrong," Elena told the project director as they watched a cellist interact with the alien patterns. "The mathematics of music is universal, but the emotion behind it, that's uniquely human. And somehow, they recognize it." "But what are they trying to tell us?" the director asked. Jason adjusted his violin and smiled. "I think they're saying they've been waiting for us to learn how to listen." Professor Hiroshi Takeda's email arrived at 2 a.m., marked urgent. Elena scrolled through the attached images with growing amazement. The renowned geologist had found microstructures identical to her meteorite samples embedded in Arctic ice cores dating back 20,000 years. By morning, 3 more reports landed in her inbox. Marine biologists discovering the same patterns in untouched deep-sea trenches, entomologists finding them preserved in amber from the Cretaceous period, and archaeologists uncovering traces in mineral deposits beneath ancient human settlements. "They've been here all along," Elena told Jason as they examined the global data, "not just for centuries, for millennia." Within a week, Elena found herself aboard a military transport plane bound for Antarctica, where the oldest samples had been recovered from ice predating human civilization. The International Research Station had become the focal point of the most significant scientific collaboration in history. Dr. Amara Okafor, the station's director, led Elena through the secure lab where ancient ice cores were kept in pristine condition. The concentration of alien particles increases dramatically in samples correlating with major evolutionary leaps in human development, she explained. Higher densities appeared during the emergence of agriculture, written language, and the Industrial Revolution. As if they were observing us, Alina suggested, or influencing our development. That's what we thought too, Dr. Okafor replied. Until yesterday. She led Alina to an observation room overlooking the containment chamber. Inside, children from the research staff families were participating in an art class, painting, sculpting with clay, and building structures with colored blocks. Watch the monitors, Dr. Okafor instructed, pointing to screens displaying microscopic views of ice core samples placed behind shielded walls in the chamber. As the children created, the ancient alien particles showed measurable changes, not just movement, but evolution. Complex structures formed, broke apart, and reformed in more sophisticated patterns with each creative decision the children made. They respond to all humans, Dr. Okafor explained, but their reaction to children is exponentially stronger, especially during creative activities. Imagination, Alina whispered. Pure, unfiltered human imagination. Further tests confirmed Alina's hypothesis. The alien particles showed minimal reaction to other Earth species, but accelerated their own evolution dramatically when exposed to human creative expression. Most intriguingly, ancient samples demonstrated the most pronounced responses, as if they'd been waiting longer to reconnect with humanity. When the visiting children's choir from Part 2 arrived at the Antarctic facility to perform for the research staff, scientists recorded the most dramatic reaction yet. The oldest ice core samples, containing alien particles carbon dated to 35,000 years ago, practically vibrated with activity during the performance, forming structures of complexity beyond anything previously observed. That evening, as Alina reviewed the data in her temporary quarters, Jason burst through her door without knocking. You need to see this, he said, tablet in hand. Teams on 3 continents just found cave paintings that match our alien patterns. They'd been trying to communicate with us since before written history. Alina studied the images from caves in France, South Africa, and Australia, each depicting spiraling patterns identical to what they'd observed in their labs, alongside paintings of human figures with arms raised toward the sky. These aren't just visitors, Alina realized, a chill running through her despite the station's heating. They've been witnessing our entire journey as a species. Not just witnessing, Jason added quietly. According to these dating results, they were present at every major leap forward in human development. I don't think that's coincidence. Alina nodded slowly, the implications becoming clear. They haven't been studying us. They'd been waiting for us to catch up. Command Sergeant Luis Ortega knew the risks when he volunteered. After 20 years in special operations, he'd confronted danger in many forms, but nothing quite like the sealed chamber at the military research facility beneath the New Mexico desert. The particles show preference for creative minds, Dr. Maxwell explained during the pre-procedure briefing. Your psychological profile indicates high scores in adaptive thinking and emotional intelligence, unusual for someone with your tactical background. Louis shrugged. My mother was a painter. I play guitar. That makes me special. Special enough, Maxwell replied. We need to understand if controlled exposure poses any threat. The experiment began with standard protocols. Minimal exposure to a concentrated sample of alien particles under triple containment. Everything proceeded normally until the 17th minute, when fluctuations in Lewis's neural activity triggered emergency alarms. Alina and Jason arrived at the facility 12 hours later, having caught the first available flight from Antarctica. They found Lewis conscious but isolated, surrounded by medical equipment and nervous scientists. His vitals are stable, Maxwell reported, but his brain activity is unprecedented. Through the observation window, Alina watched Lewis solve complex mathematical equations written on a whiteboard faster than the scientists could verify the answers. He appeared calm, focused, almost serene. Let me speak with him, Alina insisted. Inside the containment room, Lewis sat cross-legged on his bed, eyes closed. "Sergeant Ortega," Elena began. "I'm Dr. Reyes. How are you feeling?" Lewis opened his eyes and smiled. "I can hear the harmonics in your voice. Did you know each human voice has a unique mathematical pattern? Like fingerprints, but audible." "What happened during the exposure?" Elena asked. "They were waiting," Lewis said simply. "Not just in that sample, everywhere. In all of us." He gestured to his head. "They don't want to control us. They want to connect with us." Over the next 48 hours, Lewis demonstrated abilities that defied conventional understanding. Perfect recall of memories, instantaneous complex calculations, and most remarkably, the capacity to sense emotional states of others with uncanny precision. "It's not mind reading," he explained as researchers ran tests. "It's more like emotional translation. I perceive the neurochemical patterns that create feelings." When Elena brought Jason to meet Lewis, something unexpected happened. The sergeant immediately picked up Jason's violin and began playing a composition that reduced the young musician to tears. "How did you know that piece?" Jason asked, voice shaking. "My mother composed it before she died. It was never published." "I didn't know it," Lewis replied gently. "But they did. They've been with humanity for thousands of years, witnessing our creations, our emotions, our connections." That evening, Elena found Lewis staring out his window at the stars. "They're showing me fragments," he said without turning. "Civilizations rising and falling. Human tribes discovering fire. Egyptian astronomers mapping constellations. Renaissance artists mixing pigments. They've been present at every major turning point in our development." "Why?" Elena asked the question that had consumed her since the first discovery. Lewis finally turned, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Because something's coming. Something ancient and vast that moves between solar systems. The aliens haven't just been observing us. They've been preparing us." He pressed his palm against the glass, reaching toward the night sky. "We're not their hosts, Dr. Reyes. We're their partners. Maybe their last hope." As if responding to his words, research facilities worldwide reported simultaneous activity in all alien samples, a synchronized pulse that, when mapped, formed a pattern identical to human brainwaves during moments of realization. The awakening had begun. Coordinates appeared in Lewis's mind like memories he'd never formed but somehow couldn't forget. Elena watched him sketch identical latitude and longitude markings for locations on 3 different continents, remote sites in the Pyrenees Mountains, South Africa's Drakensberg Range, and Australia's Arnhem Land. "They're showing me something," Lewis explained, his pencil moving with unerring precision. "Places where humans and the organisms connected before, during critical moments in our evolution." Within 72 hours, Elena found herself descending into a narrow cave system in northern Spain, accompanied by Lewis, Jason, and a small team of archaeologists. Their headlamps illuminated walls covered with ancient paintings, handprints, hunting scenes, and abstract patterns. These were documented decades ago, Dr. Alvarez, the lead archaeologist, explained. Carbon dated to approximately 18,000 years ago, just before a significant advancement in human toolmaking. Lewis moved past the known sections, following some internal guidance until he reached a seemingly blank wall at the cave's deepest point. He placed his palm against the stone surface and closed his eyes. "There's more behind here," he whispered. "They're showing me how to find it." Careful excavation revealed a hidden chamber untouched for millennia. Inside, elaborate paintings covered every surface. But unlike typical cave art, these depicted spiraling patterns identical to the alien microorganisms, surrounding human figures with radiant lines extending from their heads. "It's the same in South Africa and Australia," Elena confirmed, reviewing satellite transmissions from the other teams. "Identical patterns in caves separated by oceans, created when human populations had no contact with each other." Carbon dating placed all 3 paintings at precisely the same historical periods: the dawn of agriculture, the Bronze Age, and just before the Classical era. Each site corresponded exactly with significant evolutionary leaps in human development. In the Spanish cave, Lewis discovered faint markings beneath the paintings, an unknown writing system unlike any ancient script ever documented. As he traced the symbols with his fingers, knowledge flooded his mind. "I can read it," he said, voice filled with wonder. "They encoded information within my neural pathways when we connected. These aren't just records, they're instructions." The message, repeated across all three sites, described the aliens' first contact with early humans. They hadn't arrived by chance. They had fled from something, seeking refuge among emerging consciousness that possessed qualities their own species had lost through evolution: creativity, emotional depth, and unpredictable thinking. They were originally part of a vast collective intelligence. Lewis translated, logical, ordered, perfect. But when they encountered human minds, chaotic, emotional, imaginative, they discovered something extraordinary: the human capacity for illogical creativity, for emotional connection, for intuitive leaps that defied strict rational analysis. These qualities had once been considered evolutionary weaknesses, but the aliens recognized them as unique in the cosmos, potentially powerful beyond measure. "They've been guiding our development," Elena realized, "not to control us, but to nurture these traits." The final panel in each cave showed a celestial alignment that astronomers confirmed would occur in less than 6 months. Beneath it, the alien script described a darkness between stars that consumed ordered thought and structured consciousness, a cosmic predator that had hunted the aliens across galaxies. "Now I understand," Lewis said quietly. "They weren't hiding among us. They were waiting for us to evolve enough to help them fight back." As Lewis spoke, archaeologists in Vatican City uncovered yet another chamber with identical markings, dating to the Renaissance, humanity's most recent creative explosion before the modern era. The message was clear: this wasn't first contact. It was a reunion. News of the cave discovery spread despite government containment efforts. Within weeks, thousands of people worldwide reported strange dreams featuring spiral patterns and ancient symbols. Some drew identical images upon waking, despite having no knowledge of the alien microorganisms. Dr. Sophia Chen, a neurologist studying the phenomenon, appeared on Elena's video screen during the daily briefing. The organisms appear to be broadcasting on frequencies the human brains can receive during REM sleep. Not everyone picks up the signal, but those with heightened creative attributes or specific neurological patterns are particularly receptive. Reports flooded in from artists, musicians, writers, and those in creative fields who experienced the most vivid connections. Many made conscious decisions to seek out exposure to the alien particles, which had become increasingly accessible as containment measures failed. Elena watched the global situation map with growing concern. "We can't control this anymore. It's happening too fast." Lewis, who had become a constant presence in the command center, shook his head. "Control was never possible. They've waited millennia for this moment. The awakening is following a plan established long before we discovered them." The first reports of enhanced mental connections between humans came from twins in Brazil who, after exposure, could share thoughts across hundreds of miles. Similar cases emerged globally, not telepathy in the traditional sense, but a complex network of shared consciousness that defied conventional neuroscience. Jason called it the Dream Network, a system of instantaneous communication that functioned through principles no technology could replicate or intercept. The aliens served as neural bridges, connecting human minds while allowing each individual to maintain their unique identity. "It's not a hive mind," Jason explained to the Scientific Council. "Everyone retains their autonomy. But information, experiences, even emotional states can be shared instantly across any distance." While governments scrambled to respond, NASA detected an anomalous signal from beyond Neptune's orbit, a fluctuation in spacetime that matched no known natural phenomenon. Conventional analysis yielded nothing coherent, But when the data was shared with members of the Dream Network, they immediately recognized patterns matching the ancient cave symbols. "It's a warning," Luz announced during an emergency session. "From a civilization that encountered the entity before, they're trying to help us prepare." Through the Dream Network, Luis and others who had bonded with the organisms collaboratively decoded the message. It described an ancient entity that consumed ordered information and structured consciousness, a cosmic predator that had existed since the early universe. "The message confirms what the cave paintings suggested," Alina reported. "Humanity possesses something unique, neural patterns shaped by creativity and emotion that generate frequencies disruptive to the entity's feeding process." The alien organisms had fled to Earth after discovering early humans' potential. While logic and order were vulnerable to the entity, human imagination created cognitive patterns it couldn't process or absorb. Dr. Maxwell, reviewing the translated message, looked up in disbelief. "They're saying we're their last hope. Humanity. Not despite our chaotic thinking," Lewis clarified, "but because of it. Our emotions, our creativity, our wildly inconsistent logic. These aren't evolutionary flaws. They're cosmic defenses." As the Dream Network expanded, participants globally reported identical visions, a vast darkness moving through the Kuiper Belt, consuming light and energy as it approached our solar system. Alina's phone chimed with an alert from astronomical observatories worldwide. The celestial alignment predicted in the cave paintings had begun 3 months earlier than calculated. "It's coming," Lewis whispered, eyes fixed on the stars. "And it's hungry." The entity made no attempt at stealth or deception as it entered the solar system. Pluto's thin atmosphere vanished within hours, absorbed completely. Astronomical instruments worldwide recorded the event, not as an explosion or collision, but as a perfect orderly consumption that left nothing behind. Military forces scrambled despite scientists' warnings that conventional weapons would be useless. Nuclear-armed spacecraft launched toward the approaching anomaly, only to disappear without impact or detonation. In the command center beneath the New Mexico desert, Alina watched the entity's steady approach on massive monitors. "It's following the orbital paths perfectly," she noted, "absorbing everything in mathematically precise patterns." Lewis nodded. "Order feeds it. Predictability strengthens it. That's why our weapons failed. They followed predetermined trajectories the entity could easily process and consume." When the entity reached Neptune, something unexpected happened. Rather than continuing its methodical consumption, it paused, its perfect edges becoming momentarily chaotic before resuming their advance. "What caused that disruption?" General Hammond demanded. Jason, who had been coordinating with Dream Network participants at Neptune's orbital research station, looked up from his console. The research team was broadcasting Vax Goldberg variations when the entity arrived. When it hesitated, they switched to free jazz improvisation. The more chaotic and emotionally expressive the music became, the more the entity struggled to maintain cohesion. Alina's eyes widened as understanding clicked into place. It processes reality through order and logic. Our chaotic, emotional thinking isn't just difficult for it to absorb. It's actively disruptive. Within hours, Alina and Luis had formulated an unprecedented defense strategy. Through the Dream Network, they connected with artists, musicians, poets, dancers, and storytellers worldwide who had bonded with the alien organisms. "The entity feeds on predictable patterns," Alina explained during a global broadcast. "Our greatest weapon is human creativity. Unpredictable, emotional, and impossible to process through pure logic." As the entity approached the asteroid belt, Earth unleashed its unique defense. Musicians improvised without structure, painters created without planning, dancers moved without choreography, and storytellers wove narratives that defied traditional plot constraints. The alien organisms, integrated with their human partners, amplified these creative expressions, converting neural patterns into energy waves that reached across space. The resulting tapestry of unpredictable human expression created disruptions in the entity's perfect structure. From orbital observatories, scientists watched in amazement as the entity's edges fragmented when faced with this barrage of human chaos. Each creative surge caused further deterioration in its cohesion. "It's working," Jason reported as data streamed in. The more spontaneous and emotionally charged the creation, the more damage it causes. When a globally coordinated burst of simultaneous improvisation from millions connected through the Dream Network reached the entity, it visibly recoiled, retreating beyond Mars' orbit. In the command center, Lewis monitored the entity's diminishing energy signature. For billions of years, it consumed species that evolved toward perfect efficiency and logical order. We're the first it's encountered who evolved in the opposite direction, toward messy creativity and emotional complexity. Elena studied the readings with cautious optimism. "We've driven it back, but not destroyed it. Every model suggests it will return once it adapts." General Hammond frowned. "How do we prepare for that?" "The same way humanity has always survived," Elena replied, watching screens showing people around the world creating, connecting, and channeling their emotions into art that crossed the void between stars. "We embrace what makes us human, our beautiful, unpredictable minds." For the first time in cosmic history, imagination had become the ultimate weapon. The entity retreated beyond the Kuiper Belt, diminished but not destroyed. Earth's victory celebration was tempered by the knowledge that they had only won a reprieve, not a final peace. In research centers worldwide, scientists and Dream Network participants worked to understand both their unexpected defender and their cosmic enemy. 3 months after the entity's retreat, Lewis requested a private meeting with Elena and Jason in the original university lab where it all began. The modest room seemed strangely appropriate for what he needed to share. "They're ready to tell us everything," Lewis said simply. "Their complete history, their purpose, their hopes for our partnership." Through Lewis and other deep-bonded humans, the alien organisms revealed their story. They had evolved from a hive-mind species that valued perfect logic and absolute order above all else. Their civilization had expanded across galaxies, engineering away traits deemed inefficient: creativity, emotion, individuality. When a small research vessel encountered primitive Earth thousands of years ago, they discovered something that shook their foundational beliefs. Early humans, with their chaotic thinking and emotional connections, were creating art, music, and social bonds that defied logical necessity, but somehow strengthened their species. "They were fascinated by us," Elena summarized for the Global Council, "by qualities their species had eliminated as evolutionary weaknesses. A small group separated from their collective, choosing to remain on Earth to study what made us unique. Over millennia, as the entity consumed their homeworld and countless other ordered civilizations, these separated observers watched humanity develop. They preserved their consciousness in microscopic structures, integrating occasionally with humans who demonstrated exceptional creativity, guiding our development not toward logical perfection, but toward strengthening our inherent chaos." "They weren't studying us," Jason said. "They were learning from us, becoming more like us." As the symbiotic relationship deepened, both species evolved. Humans gained access to collective knowledge and instantaneous communication, while the aliens rediscovered creativity and emotional connection. Together, they created something entirely new in the universe, a partnership that combined human unpredictability with alien perception. Elena stood at the window of the orbital observation platform, watching Earth rotate below. 6 months after the entity's retreat, humanity had changed profoundly. The Dream Network now connected millions worldwide. Artistic expression had become valued as essential rather than optional, and preparations continued for the entity's inevitable return. "We're detecting signals from 17 different star systems," Lewis reported, joining her at the window. "Other civilizations noticed our defense and want to understand how we succeeded where logical, technologically superior species failed." Representatives from across the galaxy were approaching Earth, not as conquerors or even teachers, but as students, Many had engineered emotional thinking from their species in pursuit of efficiency, only to discover that this apparent evolutionary advancement had left them vulnerable. They want to learn how to create again, Elena said. How to feel, how to imagine. Lewis nodded. Human creativity isn't just our defense. It might be the salvation of countless civilizations. As the first alien delegation prepared to enter Earth orbit, Elena reflected on how completely their understanding of cosmic hierarchy had been upended. Humanity, once thought to be newcomers in an ancient universe, was being sought out for the very qualities that had been considered primitive. "We've come full circle," she told Jason as they prepared to greet the visitors. "They've been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for us to recognize our greatest strength." "Which is?" Jason asked. Elena smiled. "Being perfectly, wonderfully human."